I think that just as we're living in a nuclear age, we have grown so tremendously in scientific knowledge. It doesn't seem too much to say that men can begin to awaken to the fact that they haven't grown enough spiritually and haven't recognized their spiritual capacities.
Once something like eating is death, then you've struck at the very heart of life. The enemy of the older radical theories may have been the ruling class, but today the stakes of whether we will reform ourselves into a new kind of human being, a new kind of society, whether we will find selves worth being, the stakes of it are simply life itself.
Political Philosophy is a Maurin Academy podcast. For more information about the Maurin Academy, just click on the link below. We have a lot of classes, reading groups, stuff going on all the time, a great newsletter. You can get on our Patreon for free and then decide what level you want to be at. So I highly encourage you to go and check out what we do. Today, I wanted to get back into Emmanuel Mounier's The Personalist Manifesto, and particularly I want to deal with his chapter 10, which is on the culture of the person, and just draw out some ideas from that. Obviously, kind of a free spirit, which I think is pretty indicative of the book too, actually. Kind of like you can tell the type of personality this man had. This particular chapter, The Culture of the Person, just like all the chapters, has a lot going on, and you can't talk about all of it. I highly encourage people to actually read this one. It's super packed with information and just ideas that will make you think. Even though this thing was published back in 1938, it feels very relevant now. Mounier is complaining in this chapter about basically about bourgeois culture, about capitalist culture. He thinks that the bourgeois spirit has more or less destroyed and decimated organic culture, and has tried to replace it with a sort of materialistic, consumable culture. I know it's a little anachronistic, but I have some of Andy Warhol's art in the background because I think that Warhol's art really forced us to confront this aspect of bourgeois culture that he sort of leans into so that you can contemplate it. And in his own way, Mounier is doing that in this chapter. He shares that view with a lot of other people from this time period, that capitalism has kind of destroyed culture because it's so materialistic, because it's so utilitarian, it's so much about profit, and so on and so forth. He states here that bourgeois culture lacks metaphysical and personal dimensions. It doesn't point to something higher than us, because that's usually something that you can't quantify and make a profit off of, or it tries to bring what is metaphysical or transcendent, might be a better word, to the point of being able to profit off of it, which is, unfortunately where a lot of religion goes in capitalism. It lacks personal dimension because the point, at least at the time that he was writing, he could say that the point of capitalism was to make things that appealed to the most people possible, right? And therefore kind of to, in effect, create uniformity or conformity. So in this, he sort of echoes Tocqueville's observations about American democracy, for instance. Now we have a capitalism that is, because of machine learning, because of computers, basically, we now have the ability to cater to a vast array of tastes, and that has kind of changed things a bit. But still, you definitely can see mass culture in the works. So anyway, he has a lot of complaints about capitalist bourgeois culture. Then he moves on to, and he also is complaining implicitly and explicitly about his perception of Marxist culture, um, which tried to kind of impose a popular culture, a sort of ideological view of what, communist culture ought to be like through its art, through its representations. So he certainly has that in mind when he says that culture cannot be constructed from above by the state or by organizations whose purpose it is to manufacture culture, that you can't manufacture culture. Culture cannot come at us and revive us, um, as some people think who, in his view anyway, people who bemoan the dulling effects of capitalism on culture think that you can create some sort of organization, maybe like PBS or something like that. I think that sort of was part of the idea behind PBS, the National Endowment for the Arts and things like that. Hope to kind of like jumpstart culture in a capitalist / quasi-democratic society. And he would disagree that it can happen that way. Although in his own musings, he can't help but ask himself, well, what can we do? How can we organize ourselves to elicit culture? So he doesn't fully escape from the problem of manufacturing, but he's trying. Um, he says that culture should not be unitary and all pervasive because it's supposed to bubble up from below. It's supposed to be organic in that sense of coming from the people involved in their daily living, creating it. Okay, so that's why he says the creation of culture is the free work of individual persons, or in the case of some minor works, of small communities of persons. So you see his emphasis there, even now, on the individual person, which I think I've mentioned before, kind of like bothers me a bit because I think there's a little bit too much emphasis on this in his viewpoint. Human beings are social creatures by nature, and so I think a lot of culture comes from the communities, right? And sort of from the interactions of people as they try to deal with how to get things done together. And it's only in fairly modern times, under capitalism, as a matter of fact, that we got this notion that individuals were sort of the creators of uh, their own culture or their own reality. And I'm not saying he totally goes into that territory either. I'm just saying I don't think he fully appreciates the effect of community on culture creation. Okay, but anyway, he says that collectives do not create culture at all. And there I think he is aiming at again, like Soviet or communists more generally in their creation of culture. He says that they fetter culture by simplifying and systematizing it too much. So he's giving a critique of the type of art, the type of culture that comes down from this collective perspective, but really from above, and tries to shape people's attitudes, beliefs, tastes, and so on in the direction of the collective. But then he gets into what can a personalist do to foster culture in the age of manufacturing, in the industrial age that he's living in. And here he still gets into we do have to create the context somehow, because in his view, capitalism has destroyed that context or it's ongoing. So he says the first requirement for the intellectual who wishes to collaborate at a personalist culture is courage to abandon and scuttle the well-filled ship of bourgeois culture. So the first step is just to actually say we're going to abandon bourgeois culture, which would imply that you've absorbed his critique of capitalist bourgeois culture. Notice that he's talking about the intellectual there, even though in other places he talks about how culture needs to come from ordinary people. In fact, in his second point, he says the resources of a culture are in the people. The elite among the workers, the peasants, the schoolmen, etc., must be chosen from among the saner elements of every human group, and their diversity must be encouraged. Good stuff in a way, but feels of contradiction here. Which way is it? Are we going to focus on the elite, the intellectual, or the elite among the workers? Does culture really come from the people? Must it be sort of fostered by an elite from the people? What is culture, as a matter of fact? So I don't know if I'm fully happy with this. I do think he's got a point there that the diversity is important. That there's something about a culture that's completely uniform, that automatically kind of implies it came from above and that it is artificial. I think what he's trying to get at is that he doesn't want artificial. But yet he's still recognizing in the situation that we're in, we have to jumpstart it somehow. Well, how do we create the context? Well, maybe this means like, well, we personalists have conversations with those people among the workers, the peasants, the teachers, and so on, who are most interested. And together we work together to create culture. And then third, he says there is no culture, though, without metaphysical and personal elements. Okay, so there he's defining a bit, but it's still amorphous. But a proper culture, and we know this is why he doesn't like capitalist culture. A proper culture recognizes the transcendent and is sort of aimed at it. And he doesn't say it has to be, the Christian religion or the Christian God or even religion, but it has to aim at something transcendent. And also the personal for him, of course, remember that means the interior life, that it's got to develop the interior life of the person and enrich the person in a variety of ways, right? In their relationship with the transcendent, probably most particularly. Okay. Then he says it is metaphysical because it aims beyond man, beyond sense pleasure, beyond utility, and beyond mere social functioning. It is personal because only that which enriches the subject interiorly merits the name of culture, and not that which merely gives an increased exterior polish of manner and speech. Well, here he's taking aim at the tendency, maybe particularly the 20th century, mid 20th century, like preoccupation with being, quote, cultured. So in the United States, in the mid 20th century, there were a lot of people who were kind of aping British and French culture because they thought that it was more sophisticated, and they were aping a particular vision of it with the accent and the way, the mannerisms and so on and so forth. So I think what Mounier is doing here is taking aim at that. In French culture, I'm not sure what that looked like at his time, but I'm sure they had people within French society who were trying to be cultured and who thought that that required certain affectations, or maybe you had to read and know about only the great books, or you had to, appreciate classical music, or I don't know what, but I hope you get the point. So I think he's taking aim at that which he considers to be sort of superficial polish. That's really not what he's talking about, but he's talking about elevating people's tastes and in what they take in, intellectually, aesthetically, taking in things that truly enrich a person in their inside, in their soul, in their mind, and particularly that aim at something higher than the material things of life. Okay. So I think that's at least something of a notion of what culture would look like to him. Mounier doesn't go into specifics. Really logically, he can't, because if culture is organic, then you don't know exactly where it's going to go. On the other hand, he is saying that he knows it when he sees it, okay? And that capitalist culture or bourgeois culture is not true culture in his view, or it's lame culture, as in it doesn't quite meet the mark. And so I guess a question I have for him is, are we missing anything, you know, cultural in the scene that he's describing? Are there aspects of culture going on at that time amongst working class people, and people who don't necessarily aim at high culture, that are actually worth considering and paying attention to? I honestly think that at that time, there still was quite a bit of traditional culture, at least in the United States. Again, I can't speak so much for the French, but in France, maybe it would be particularly Catholic culture, that the people continued to try to hang on to post-revolution and, post all the different republics. Still, there was this traditionalist culture that kind of came out, for instance, in some of the intellectuals of the time period that were really into church teachings. And we're trying to meld Catholic culture and Catholic social teaching with what was going on at the moment. So I don't think that he's right to say that, especially at his time, there was no worthy attempts at popular culture coming from below and being organic and responding to the changes that were going on with industrialization and the collectivization of work. All of our discussion earlier, I've done a whole playlist on distributism. Uh, those people were definitely doing that at this time. And Spencer and I remember interviewed Rich Myrick from on Dustbowl Diatribes, um, on this zone in France, that was partly, where Peter Maurin came from, the future founder of the Catholic worker movement, that was attempting to reconcile Catholic social teachings and Catholic culture with the ongoing changes that Mounier would label bourgeois culture. So I think maybe he's missing that because he has so much distaste for what he perceives as kind of like the wreckage of capitalism, um, that maybe he can't see what's already being done by working people, by ordinary people, to try to adjust and to develop culture out of that wreckage, so to speak. So with that caveat, I would say Mounier's got a lot of really good thoughts here. And next time we talk, I'll move on to his chapter on capitalism as the enemy of the person. So there we'll get more into why is it that he's so so negative about capitalism? What is it specifically about capitalism? All right, so we'll see you next time.